Stand on a hill 15,000 years ago and look out. Grassland, a river, hills beyond it. You could walk in any direction until your legs gave out and never cross a border, never show a document, never be told you don't belong here. For almost all of human existence, that was simply how the world was. Today, every habitable piece of land on Earth is claimed by one of 193 countries. So somebody somewhere invented this. And here's the strange part. It didn't start with a map, or an army, or a line on the ground. It started with a grave. We tend to imagine countries beginning with a border. Someone draws a line and calls the inside ours, but that's the wrong order. The line came last. Before it came three inventions that nobody would call political: a grave, a ledger, and a story. But first, why do we need countries at all? The answer starts inside your skull. The evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar proposed that humans can only maintain around 150 stable relationships. It's a famous idea. It's also a contested one, and plenty of researchers dispute the number. But the ceiling itself is real. Below it, you can govern a group by reputation alone. Everyone knows your name. Everyone remembers who owes what. Gossip does the work of a legal system. Now scale that up to 40,000 people. It collapses instantly. You cannot run a city on neighborly goodwill, so humans needed a workaround. The country is that workaround. And it was built in layers. Layer 1 begins with a decision nobody thought of as political. Humans stopped moving. Around 12,000 years ago in the Levant, a culture we call the Natufians settled down. Round stone houses, storage pits. And here's the crucial part. They weren't farmers yet. They settled first and worked out agriculture later. And settling down transforms your relationship with the ground under your feet. When you're nomadic, land is something you pass through. When you settle, land is something you invest in. You clear it, you store food on it, and eventually you bury your dead in it. The Natufians left formal cemeteries, and once your ancestors are in that soil, it stops being dirt. It becomes identity. Some archaeologists argue that early tombs and monuments worked as territorial markers, a silent claim. This land belongs to the people who came from these bones. The first border marker wasn't a fence, it was a grave. But graves only bind people who share ancestors. To bind strangers, you need something else. In southeastern Turkey stands a site called Göbekli Tepe, roughly 11,000 years old. Enormous T-shaped stone pillars, carved with animals, arranged in circles. Thousands of years older than Stonehenge. Thousands of years older than the pyramids. And the people who built it were still hunter-gatherers. Scattered bands traveled in and raised something monumental together. The archaeologist Klaus Schmidt argued this meant the temple came before the city. That belief pulled people together first, and settlement followed. That interpretation is still debated, but the underlying point holds. You cannot personally know 10,000 people, but you can believe the same thing as 10,000 people you have never met. Shared belief was the first technology that broke through the ceiling in your head. At Göbekli Tepe, the story was carved into stone. Today, it's printed on a passport. But belief alone doesn't make a state. For that, you need something surprisingly boring. You need wheat. The political scientist James C. Scott made an argument in his book Against the Grain that is hard to forget. The first states, he argues, formed around grain specifically, not roots, not tubers, grain. And the reason is almost comically simple. A yam grows underground. It's invisible. You can leave it in the soil and dig it up whenever you like. Nobody can count your yams by walking past your field. But wheat stands up in the open. It ripens all at once. Anyone with eyes can estimate the harvest, which means grain can be measured, stored, divided, and taxed. Scott's argument is that the early state was, at its core, a grain collection operation. It's an influential idea, and a debated one. But sit with the implication for a moment. Borders, armies, laws, bureaucracies, all of its scaffolding built around a crop you can count. And once you're collecting grain from thousands of people, you hit a new problem. You have to remember who paid and who didn't. Around 5,000 years ago in southern Mesopotamia, a settlement called Uruk grew into the first true city. Tens of thousands of people living together, most of them strangers. You cannot govern that by gossip. You need records. So they invented writing, and this is the detail that surprises almost everyone. The earliest clay tablets are not poetry, not prayers, not epic tales of gods and heroes. The overwhelming majority are administrative. Receipts, grain distributions, worker ration lists, livestock counts. The scholar Denise Schmant-Bisserat traced writing itself back to small clay tokens used for counting goods. Humanity's first written words were most likely a number, sitting next to a picture of a bag of barley. The country wasn't founded on philosophy, it was founded on paperwork. And only now, at the very end of all this, do we finally get the line. Around 4,500 years ago, two Sumerian city-states, Lagash and Umma, argued over a strip of fertile land. A third ruler stepped in, surveyed the boundary, and set up an inscribed stone to mark it, carved into that stone, where one territory ended and the other began. It is one of the oldest records we have of a formal political border. Two neighbors arguing over exactly where the dividing line sits. 4,000 years later, that argument still hasn't stopped. But even a kingdom with borders isn't yet a country, in the way you mean the word. Ancient empires were held together by a ruler. What they lacked was the idea that ordinary people belonged to each other. And that idea is startlingly recent. The legal framework is usually traced to the treaties signed in Westphalia in 1648, the principle that each state governs its own internal affairs. Historians debate how sharp that break really was, but the emotional framework arrived even later. The scholar Benedict Anderson called a nation an imagined community. Not imaginary, imagined. You will never meet almost anyone you share a country with. You have no personal bond with them. You would disagree with most of them about most things. And yet you feel somehow that you are part of the same story. That feeling isn't natural, it was built. And not every line on the map was drawn by the people living under it. Many modern borders were drawn in distant conferences, by officials who had never visited the land they were dividing. Those lines cut through communities and joined together others who had never shared a government. After independence, many nations kept those borders anyway. Redrawing them looked more dangerous than living with them, and the process never stopped. In 1945, the United Nations had 51 members. Today it has 193. The world is still inventing countries, so come back to that hill and the grassland with no line across it. In 1882, the philosopher Ernest Renan gave the best definition anyone has managed. He said a nation's existence is a daily plebiscite, a vote held every single day. It exists because the people inside it keep choosing to act as though it exists. Tonight you'll go home to a country. You probably won't think about it once, but it's younger than pottery, younger than farming, younger than the wheel. For most of our species' history, it simply did not exist. It exists now because someone buried their parents in a field. Someone counted a harvest. Someone carved a boundary into stone, and someone convinced a crowd of strangers that they were somehow the same kind of people. That's what a country is. A story that enough people believed for long enough that it became real. And every morning, without anyone asking you to, you wake up and believe it.